Sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do is show kindness to a stranger. Sometimes that kindness becomes the only thing standing between an innocent child and a world that wants to destroy her. Cole Mercer found a lost girl in the desert and took her in without asking questions. She was scared, alone, and wouldn't tell him her name. He gave her food, shelter, and protection because it was the right thing to do. What Cole didn't know was that bounty hunters across the territory were hunting for this same little girl. Her father had a $50,000 price on his head, the biggest bounty in Arizona territory history. Now Cole has to make a choice that will change both their lives forever. What happens when doing the right thing puts you on the wrong side of every gun in the West? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Arizona sun had already begun its merciless climb when Cole Mercer stepped out of his weathered cabin, the floorboards creaking beneath boots that had seen too many miles and too many years. At 53, his face carried the deep lines that come from squinting into desert horizons and bearing burdens that younger men couldn't imagine. His hair, once the color of autumn wheat, had turned silver at the temples, and his hands, scarred and steady, told stories he preferred to keep buried. Dust Creek wasn't much of a town anymore. What had once been a bustling stop for cattle drives and mining operations had dwindled to fewer than 200 souls, most of them hanging on out of stubbornness rather than hope. The main street, if you could call it that, consisted of a general store, a saloon that doubled as a boarding house, Doc Harrison's medical practice, and a sheriff's office that saw more tumbleweeds than trouble these days. Cole's daily routine never varied much. He'd tend to his few horses, 3 aging mares that belonged more to the desert than to any man, then walk the half-mile to the Brennan Ranch, where he earned his keep mending fences and breaking the occasional Mustang. The work was honest but sparse, paying just enough to keep him in beans and coffee with little left over. He'd grown accustomed to the gnawing in his belly that came with lean times, just as he'd grown accustomed to the weight of solitude. The girl had been with him for 3 days now, and she still hadn't spoken a word. He'd found her wandering near the old copper mine, her small frame silhouetted against the massive red rocks that jutted from the desert floor like ancient monuments. Her dress was torn, her feet bare and bleeding, and her dark eyes held a terror that made Cole's chest tighten with a pain he hadn't felt in years. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, with long black hair matted with dust and tears streaking clean paths down her dirty cheeks. When he'd approached her, she'd bolted like a spooked colt. But hunger and exhaustion had finally won over fear, and she'd allowed him to lead her back to his cabin. He'd given her his only clean shirt to sleep in and prepared what food he had. Hardtack softened in warm milk, a bit of jerky, and some dried peaches he'd been saving. She'd eaten like she hadn't seen food in days, which, judging by her condition, was probably true. Little bird, he'd taken to calling her. Partly because she reminded him of something small and frightened, partly because she seemed ready to take flight at the slightest provocation. She'd flinch whenever he moved too quickly, and loud noises would send her scrambling under the table or behind the wood stove. Someone had hurt this child, and badly. Cole knew something about being haunted. His own past cast long shadows, filled with faces he'd rather forget and choices that still woke him in the cold hours before dawn. 20 years ago, he'd been known by a different reputation in different towns. Towns where his name was spoken in whispers and where smart men stepped aside when they saw him coming. He'd been fast with a gun, faster than most. And in the violent years following the war between the states, that skill had kept him alive while others fell around him like autumn leaves. But speed with a gun came at a price. Every man he'd faced, every life he'd taken in those hard years, had left its mark. He'd tried drowning the memories in whiskey, tried outrunning them on dusty trails that led nowhere, but they followed him like faithful hounds. It wasn't until he'd seen what his reputation was doing to the towns he passed through, the fear in children's eyes, The way decent folks crossed the street rather than risk his attention, that he'd finally decided to disappear. Cole Mercer, the gunfighter, had died in a saloon fire in Tombstone. Or at least, that's what the newspapers had reported. The man who'd walked away from those flames was just Cole, a drifter looking for honest work and a chance to make amends for the blood on his hands. The irony wasn't lost on him that his quest for redemption had led to this moment, caring for a lost child who reminded him so painfully of the daughter he'd never been able to save. Sarah would have been about this girl's age now, if the fever hadn't taken her. That had been 15 years ago, back when Cole still had a wife and a small ranch in New Mexico territory. The fever had swept through their county like a prairie fire, taking children and elders first, leaving broken families in its wake. He'd been away on a cattle drive when it struck, earning money to buy medicine for Sarah's mother, who'd been struggling with consumption. By the time he'd returned, both his wife and daughter were buried in the little cemetery behind the church. That's when Cole Mercer, the family man, had died too. What emerged from that grief was something harder, colder, a man who hired his gun to the highest bidder and tried to fill the hollow spaces inside with violence and whiskey. Now, watching Little Bird peek at him over the rim of a tin cup filled with warm milk, Cole felt those old protective instincts stirring. She had the same dark hair as Sarah, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. And like Sarah, she seemed to understand more than she let on. "You're safe here," he told her each morning, his voice gentle in a way it hadn't been for years. "Nobody's going to hurt you while I'm around." She never responded with words, but sometimes he caught her nodding slightly. And once, just once, he thought he'd seen the ghost of a smile. Doc Harrison had examined her on the second day, pronouncing her physically healthy despite the obvious signs of hardship. "She's been through something terrible," the old physician had said, his weathered hands gentle as he checked her pulse. "Sometimes the mind protects itself by going quiet. Give her time, Cole, and whatever you do, don't push her to talk. She'll find her voice when she feels safe enough." The townspeople had been curious but not suspicious. Dust Creek had seen its share of orphans and displaced children over the years, victims of Apache raids, mining accidents, and the general harshness of frontier life. Martha Brennan, who ran the saloon and had a soft heart beneath her tough exterior, had donated some of her late daughter's clothes. Sheriff Bartlett, a decent man grown lazy in his advancing years, had asked only perfunctory questions about where Cole had found her, but Cole could sense that easy acceptance wouldn't last forever. Dust Creek might be isolated, but news traveled the desert trails like tumbleweed, carried by traders, drifters, and the occasional territorial marshal. If someone was looking for this girl, and given her obvious distress, someone surely was. Word would eventually reach them. He'd considered taking her to the territorial orphanage in Tucson, but something held him back. Maybe it was the way she'd grabbed his hand that first night, when thunder had rolled across the desert, or how she'd positioned herself between him and the door each morning as if guarding his back. She trusted him, and trust was a precious thing in this harsh country. More than that, Cole was discovering that caring for her filled a void he'd been carrying for 15 years. Having someone to cook for, someone who needed his protection, someone who looked at him without fear or calculation, it reminded him of what it felt like to be human, rather than just a weapon in human form. Each evening, after he'd returned from his work at the Brennan Ranch, he'd find her exactly where he'd left her, sitting at his small wooden table, sometimes drawing pictures in the dust with her finger, sometimes just watching the door for his return. He'd taken to bringing her small gifts, a smooth stone from the creek bed, a hawk feather, once a tiny barrel cactus bloom that had caught his eye. She'd accept each offering solemnly, adding them to a little collection she kept on the windowsill. Tonight was no different. Cole pushed through his door as the sun painted the western sky in shades of copper and gold, and there she was, her small figure silhouetted against the lamplight. She'd been practicing writing, he noticed, using a piece of charcoal on the back of an old wanted poster. The letters were careful and precise, too precise for a child her age who'd grown up on the frontier. "You've had schooling," he said softly, hanging his hat on the peg beside the door. It wasn't a question. The girl looked up at him with those dark, knowing eyes, but said nothing, as he prepared their simple supper, beans and cornbread with a bit of bacon fat for flavor. Cole found himself talking to her more than he'd talked to anyone in years. He told her about the horses he'd worked with that day, about the red-tailed hawk he'd seen hunting mice in the tall grass, about the way the mountains looked different depending on the time of day and the season. She listened to every word, her attention complete and unwavering. After they'd eaten, Cole stepped outside to check on his horses while she helped clear the dishes. The desert night was crisp and clear, stars beginning to emerge like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote voiced its loneliness to the moon, and Cole felt an unexpected surge of contentment. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't alone, but as he stood there in the doorway, watching Little Bird carefully wash their few dishes in the basin he'd filled for her, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was temporary. Good things had a way of slipping through his fingers like desert sand, and he'd learned not to trust happiness too deeply. Still, for tonight, it was enough to have someone to care for. Someone who needed him to be more than just a ghost of violence and regret. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles, as tomorrows always did in this hard country. But tonight, watching over this small, brave girl who'd somehow found her way into his heart, Cole Mercer allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found his chance at redemption. The riders came into Dust Creek like a dust storm. 3 men on horseback with the lean, predatory look of professional hunters. Cole spotted them from the Brennan Ranch fence line, where he'd been replacing rotted posts, their silhouettes dark against the morning sun. Even at a distance, something about their posture, the way they sat their saddles, the deliberate pace of their approach, set his nerves on edge. He finished securing the wire and made his way back to town, arriving just as the strangers were tying their horses to the rail outside Martha's saloon. Up close, they looked exactly like what Cole had feared, bounty hunters. Their clothes were trail-worn but well-maintained, their weapons clean and accessible, and they moved with the casual confidence of men who were very good at finding people who didn't want to be found. The leader was a tall man with graying hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they saw. His companions were younger, harder-looking, with the restless energy of wolves on the hunt. Cole recognized the type. He'd been one himself once upon a time. "Afternoon," the leader said as Cole passed. His voice was polite but calculating. "You wouldn't happen to be the town sheriff, would you?" "That'd be Bartlett," Cole replied, keeping his own voice steady. "His office is down the street. You gentlemen have business in Dust Creek?" "Looking for someone," the man said, his eyes never leaving Cole's face. "Young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Dark hair, dark eyes. Might have been traveling alone or with strangers. There's a reward for information leading to her whereabouts." Cole felt his blood turn to ice water, but his expression remained neutral. 20 years of hiding his thoughts had taught him to control every muscle in his face. Reward. Must be some special little girl. "Oh, she is." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Her daddy's got quite a price on his head. $50,000 last I heard. Name's Morrison, folks call him Blackjack. Meanest son of a gun in the territory, and that's saying something. Word is, he'll do anything to get his little princess back." The wanted poster came out of the man's saddlebag like a striking snake. Cole glanced at it with what he hoped looked like casual interest, but his heart nearly stopped. The face staring back at him from the yellowed paper was weathered and bearded, with hard eyes and a cruel mouth. But those eyes, he'd seen those same dark, intelligent eyes looking at him across his breakfast table for the past 4 days. "Blackjack Morrison," the bounty hunter continued, watching Cole's reaction carefully. "Wanted for murder, bank robbery, cattle rustling, and about a dozen other crimes. The territorial governor himself put up the reward money. Anyone who helps us find his daughter gets a cut of the bounty when we bring him in." "50,000's a lot of money," Cole said slowly. It was more money than most men in Dust Creek would see in a lifetime. More than enough to buy a real ranch, maybe start over somewhere else. Hell, it was enough to live comfortably for years. Indeed it is. Makes a man think, doesn't it? The bounty hunter rolled up the poster and tucked it back into his saddlebag. Name's Wade Garrett, by the way. These are my associates, Jim Cowell and Dutch Mackenzie. We'll be staying in town a few days, asking questions, following up on leads. I trust we'll have everyone's full cooperation. It wasn't really a question. Cole nodded and continued toward his cabin, but his mind was racing. The girl, Little Bird, was Blackjack Morrison's daughter. The most wanted man in the Arizona Territory was her father, and she was worth a fortune to anyone willing to turn her in. He found her exactly where he'd left her that morning, sitting at the table with the charcoal and paper he'd given her. She'd been drawing again. Pictures of horses and mountains, and what looked like a small house with smoke coming from the chimney. But when she looked up and saw his face, her own expression changed instantly. The trust and contentment that had been growing there over the past few days vanished, replaced by the same terrified wariness he'd seen that first day in the desert. She knew. Somehow she knew that everything had changed. Cole sat down across from her, his movements slow and deliberate. "Little Bird," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something important, and I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She didn't nod, but she didn't look away either. "There are men in town. They're looking for you. They say your daddy's name is Jack Morrison, and that he's done some bad things. Is that true?" For a long moment, the only sound in the cabin was the ticking of his old pocket watch and the distant murmur of voices from the street. Then so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered her first word. "Please." Cole's throat tightened. "Please what, darling?" "Please don't let them take me." The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for days. "Please, mister. I'll be good. I won't cause trouble. Just don't give me to them. Why? What would they do to you?" She looked down at her hands, small fingers twisting together. "They'll use me to hurt Papa. They don't care about the bad things people say he did. They just want the money." She looked up at him with eyes far too old for her face. "And when Papa comes for me, they'll kill him." Cole studied her carefully. "You love your daddy?" "Yes, sir. He's not like what the posters say. He never hurt nobody who didn't deserve it. And he never hurt children or women, never." Her voice grew stronger, more certain. "The men who want him, they're the ones who are bad. They killed Mama, and they're trying to kill Papa, and they want to use me to do it." The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Cole needed more information. "What's your real name, Little Bird?" "Emma Rose Morrison." She said it with quiet dignity, as if she were introducing herself at a church social. "And your mama?" "Sarah Ann Morrison. She was beautiful, and she sang to me every night." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "The bad men shot her when she wouldn't tell them where Papa was hiding our money. But there wasn't any money. Papa gave it all away to folks who needed it after the bank took their farms." Cole felt something cold settle in his stomach. If Emma was telling the truth, and something about her steady gaze convinced him she was, then Blackjack Morrison might not be the villain the wanted posters made him out to be. Which meant the bounty hunters weren't the good guys in this story, and that changed everything. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Cole motioned for Emma to go to the back room, then opened the door to find Wade Garrett standing on his porch, hat in hand, and that cold smile on his face. "Mr. Mercer, isn't it? Hope you don't mind the intrusion. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." "About what?" "Well, folks in town mentioned you've had a young house guest recently. A little girl you found out in the desert. That's mighty Christian of you, taking in a stray like that." Garrett's eyes moved past Cole, trying to see into the cabin. "Mind if I have a look at her? Just to rule her out, you understand. Save everyone a lot of trouble." Cole didn't move from the doorway. "She's sleeping. Fever's been keeping her down for days. Doc Harrison says it might be contagious." "That's so." Garrett's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. "Funny thing about that. I just spoke with Doc Harrison. He says the little girl he examined 3 days ago was healthy as a horse. No sign of fever at all." The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Cole could feel his hand wanting to drift toward where his gun would have hung if he still wore one. Old habits died hard, Maybe you misunderstood him, Cole said finally. Maybe I did. Garrett put his hat back on and touched the brim in a mockery of politeness. But I'll be back, Mr. Mercer, maybe with the sheriff next time. See, I've got a job to do, and I'm very good at my job. If that little girl in there is who I think she is, then keeping her from me is a crime. And I'd hate to see a decent man like yourself get caught up in something ugly. The threat hung in the air between them like gun smoke. Cole watched the bounty hunter walk back toward the saloon, noting how his hand never strayed far from his weapon. When he turned back into the cabin, Emma was standing in the doorway to the back room. Her face pale but determined. "We have to leave, don't we?" she said. Cole looked at this small, brave girl who'd somehow become the most important thing in his world and made his choice. The bounty money, $50,000, would have solved every problem he had. But some things were worth more than money. "Yes, darling, we have to leave tonight." The silver locket fell from Emma's small bundle of possessions as Cole helped her pack. It hit the floor with a soft chime, springing open to reveal a tiny portrait of a woman with kind eyes and Emma's same dark hair. Cole picked it up carefully, studying the delicate features captured in the miniature painting. "That's Mama," Emma said softly, taking the locket from his hands and clasping it around her neck. "Papa gave it to her on their wedding day. She said I should always keep it close to my heart, so she'd always be with me." Cole nodded, understanding the weight of such keepsakes. He had his own collection of memories: Sarah's hair ribbon tucked away in his saddlebags, his wife's wedding ring on a chain around his neck. The dead had a way of traveling with the living, whether in lockets or in the spaces between heartbeats. They worked quickly but quietly, gathering only what they could carry. Cole's possessions fit easily into his worn saddlebags: a change of clothes, ammunition for the rifle he'd retrieved from its hiding place under the floorboards, his father's Bible, and what little money he'd managed to save. Emma's needs were simpler: the clothes Martha had given her, her charcoal and paper for drawing, and the small treasures Cole had brought her over the past few days. "We need to talk about what comes next," Cole said, checking the window for any sign of movement from the street. "Those men aren't going to give up easy. They'll follow us, and they'll be faster and better equipped than we are." Emma sat on the edge of his bed, swinging her legs nervously. "Where will we go?" "Your daddy, do you know where he might be? Somewhere safe, maybe, where he'd wait for you if you got separated." She was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her bundle and pulled out a piece of paper. It was covered with her careful drawings, but this one was different from the others. Instead of horses and houses, she'd drawn what looked like a map: mountains and a winding river, with an X marked near what appeared to be a cave or mine entrance. "Papa showed me this place before the bad men came," she said. "I'm pointing to the X. He said if we ever got split up, I should try to get here. There's water and a place to hide, and he'd check there every few days looking for me." Cole studied the map carefully. The landmarks were basic but clear: a distinctive rock formation, a bend in what was probably Willow Creek, and the old Esperanza mine that had been abandoned for 20 years. It was maybe a day's hard ride north, up in the foothills where the desert gave way to pine and juniper. "How long ago did he tell you this?" "Just before," Emma's voice caught. "Just before they killed Mama. Maybe 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. If Blackjack Morrison was still alive, still free, he might indeed be checking that location regularly. Or it might be a trap, with bounty hunters waiting in the shadows. Cole had no way of knowing which. What he did know was that staying in Dust Creek meant certain capture. Wade Garrett wasn't the type to be fooled by Cole's lies for long, and there were only so many places to hide a child in a town this small. "All right, little bird, we'll head for your daddy's hideout. But first, I need to teach you some things. The trail's going to be dangerous, and you'll need to be ready for anything." Over the next hour, as the sun set and shadows lengthened across the desert floor, Cole began Emma's education in survival. He showed her how to sit a horse properly, how to hold the reins for maximum control, and how to stay low in the saddle if they needed to move fast. She was a quick learner, her small hands steady as she practiced the motions. "If something happens to me," he said, checking the loads in his rifle, "you remember what I'm teaching you now. You get to that mine and you wait for your daddy. Don't trust anyone else, you understand? Not lawmen, not friendly strangers, not anyone who says they're there to help. What about Doc Harrison? Or Miss Martha? Cole paused. Both of them were good people, the kind who'd help a child without asking too many questions. But good intentions wouldn't stop a bullet, and association with Emma would put them in danger. They're fine folks, he said carefully, but this trouble's bigger than they can handle. The men hunting you, they'll hurt anyone who gets in their way. Emma nodded solemnly, and Cole was struck again by her maturity. Most children her age would be in tears by now, frightened and overwhelmed by the upheaval. But Emma seemed to understand that their situation was deadly serious, and she was rising to meet it with a courage that reminded him of her father's reputation. Not the villain from the wanted posters, but the man who taught his daughter to be strong in the face of danger. As full darkness settled over Dust Creek, Cole made his final preparations. He saddled his best horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Belle, who'd carried him through hard country before. For Emma, he chose the gentlest of his 3 horses, a small bay gelding called Biscuit, who was sure-footed and calm. They were nearly ready when the sound of boots on his porch made Cole freeze. A soft knock followed, then Doc Harrison's familiar voice. "Cole, it's me. We need to talk." Cole motioned for Emma to stay hidden, then cracked the door open. The old doctor looked worried, his weathered face creased with concern. "Those bounty hunters have been asking a lot of questions," Doc Harrison said quietly. "They know the girl's here, Cole. Garrett's planning to come back with Sheriff Bartlett tomorrow morning, maybe bring a judge's warrant. You need to know that." "Appreciate the warning, Doc." The old man studied Cole's face carefully. "That child, she's not what those wanted posters make her out to be, is she?" Cole considered his words carefully. Doc Harrison had been nothing but kind to Emma, but the less he knew, the safer he'd be. "Sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing," Cole said finally. Doc Harrison nodded slowly. "I figured as much. I've been practicing medicine for 40 years, Cole. I've seen plenty of children who've been through trauma, and that little girl's not afraid of her father. She's afraid for him. There's a difference." The doctor reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Medical supplies," he said, pressing it into Cole's hands. "Bandages, laudanum for pain, some other things that might come in handy on the trail. And this," he handed Cole a folded piece of paper. "It's a letter signed by me, stating that the child was under my medical care and showed no signs of abuse or mistreatment. Might help if you run into honest law enforcement." Cole felt a tightness in his throat. "Doc, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. That little girl deserves better than to be used as bait in some bounty hunter's trap." Doc Harrison gripped Cole's shoulder firmly. "You get her somewhere safe, you hear me? And if you see her father, you tell him he's got friends in this world, even if the law says otherwise." After the doctor left, Cole finished loading their supplies. The night was clear and cold, with a thin moon providing just enough light to travel by. In the distance, he could hear voices from the saloon, Garrett and his men probably drinking and planning their next move. "Ready?" he asked Emma, who was wrapped in one of his old coats. Looking even smaller than usual. "Yes, sir," she said. Though he could hear the tremor in her voice, Cole helped her mount Biscuit, adjusting the stirrups to fit her short legs. The horse stood patiently, as if sensing the importance of his cargo. "One more thing," Cole said, reaching into his saddlebags. He pulled out an old Colt revolver, smaller than his rifle, but still deadly in the right hands. "I'm going to teach you to shoot. Not tonight, but soon. A person needs to be able to protect themselves out here." Emma stared at the gun with wide eyes. "Papa always said guns were only for protecting people you love." "Your papa's a wise man," Cole said, sliding the Colt back into his saddlebag. "That's exactly what they're for." They rode out of Dust Creek in silence, keeping to the shadows and back trails that Cole knew like the lines on his palm. Behind them, the lights of the town grew smaller and dimmer, until finally they were swallowed by the vast darkness of the desert night. Ahead lay the unknown, danger and hardship, certainly, but also the possibility of reunion and redemption. As Belle's hooves found their rhythm on the rocky ground, Cole allowed himself to hope that somewhere in those distant mountains, a father was waiting for his daughter to come home. The hand-drawn map proved more accurate than Cole had expected. By dawn, they'd covered nearly 15 miles following Emma's careful landmarks. A lightning-split cottonwood, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, and the bend in Willow Creek, where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Emma had an artist's eye for detail, and her memory was sharp as a steel trap. They made camp in a grove of mesquite trees, far enough from the creek to avoid other travelers, but close enough to hear the waters whisper. Cole unsaddled the horses while Emma gathered dry wood for a small fire, moving with the quiet efficiency of a child who'd learned to make herself useful. "Tell me about your papa," Cole said, as they shared a breakfast of hardtack and coffee. "What's he really like?" Emma's face lit up for the first time since they'd left Dust Creek. "He's tall, taller than you even, and he has kind eyes, not scary like in those pictures. He taught me to read and write and cipher numbers. Said education was the most important thing a person could have because nobody could take it away from you." She pulled out her piece of charcoal and began sketching on a flat stone. "He used to be a teacher before the war came. Had his own schoolhouse in a little town called Verde Valley. But when the soldiers left, bad men came and took everything from the people. The bank, the sheriff, everyone. Papa tried to fight them with the law, but they owned the law too." The sketch taking shape on the stone showed a man's face, not the hard, cruel features from the wanted poster, but someone with Emma's same intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. "That's when he started taking their stolen money and giving it back to the folks it belonged to," Emma continued. "He never kept nothing for himself, except what we needed to eat and buy supplies. The bad men called him an outlaw, but Papa said sometimes being an outlaw was the only way to be a good man." Cole studied the drawing, seeing the resemblance between father and daughter. "What about your mama? How'd she meet your papa?" "She was the town doctor's daughter. Papa used to bring hurt people to her papa's office, folks who'd been beat up by the bad men's gang. Mama said she fell in love with Papa because he never asked for anything for himself, only for other people." Emma's voice grew soft with memory. "They got married under the big oak tree in the town square. Mama wore white lace and carried wildflowers." The picture Emma painted was far different from the ruthless outlaw described on the wanted posters. It sounded more like a man driven to desperate measures by circumstances beyond his control. A teacher turned reluctant rebel, fighting corruption with the only weapons he had. But Cole knew better than most that the truth was usually more complicated than it appeared. Good men could do bad things when pushed too far, and even the most noble causes could lead to violence and bloodshed. Still, watching Emma talk about her father with such obvious love and respect, it was hard to believe Black Jack Morrison was the monster the law made him out to be. A distant sound made Cole's head snap up, the rhythmic thud of approaching horses. He counted at least 4 riders, moving fast and heading in their direction. "Emma, listen to me," he said quietly, already moving toward the horses. "Take Biscuit and ride up into those rocks. Find a place to hide and don't come out until I call for you. If something happens to me, you follow that creek north until you reach the mine. You understand?" Emma's eyes were wide, but she nodded, scrambling onto Biscuit's back with practiced ease. Cole watched her disappear into the jumbled boulders above their camp, then turned to face whatever was coming. The riders emerged from a stand of Palo Verde trees like ghosts materializing from the desert heat. 4 men on lathered horses, moving with the desperate urgency of pursuit. But these weren't Wade Garrett's bounty hunters. These men looked harder, meaner, with the casual brutality of outlaws rather than the professional competence of lawmen. The leader was a big man, with a scarred face and dead eyes, the kind of eyes Cole had seen too many times in his gunfighting days. His companions looked cut from the same cloth, killers who'd do anything for money and enjoyed the work besides. "Well, well," the leader said, reining his horse to a stop 20 feet away. "Look what we got here, boys." A traveler all by his lonesome. His gaze swept the camp, noting the 2 sets of tracks, the small pile of gear that belonged to a child. "Course, seems like he might not be quite as lonesome as he appears." Cole kept his hands visible and his voice steady. "Just passing through, friend. No trouble wanted." "Oh, I'm sure you don't want trouble. But see, we're looking for someone. Little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Dark hair, pretty as a picture. Her daddy's got quite a price on his head. And we figured we'd collect that bounty ourselves, instead of letting some fancy hunters from back east get it." The man's smile was like a rattlesnake's warning. "Now, we tracked 2 horses this far, and one of them's carrying a child's weight. So why don't you save us all some time and tell us where she is?" Cole measured the distance between himself and his rifle, propped against a nearby tree. "Too far. These men were spread out, positioned to cut off any escape route. They knew their business." "Don't know what you're talking about," Cole said. "Haven't seen any little girls out here." "That's a shame," the leader said, drawing his gun with lazy confidence. "Because we're going to tear this whole area apart looking for her. And if we find out you've been lying to us, well, let's just say it won't go easy for you." One of the other men had dismounted and was examining their cold campfire. "Boss, look at this. 2 plates, 2 cups. And this blanket here's got long black hairs on it." The leader's eyes hardened. "Last chance, friend. Where's the girl?" Cole knew he was out of options. These weren't men who could be reasoned with or bought off. They were killers, plain and simple, and they'd torture him until he gave up Emma's location. Then they'd kill them both, rather than leave witnesses. The old instincts kicked in, the survival skills that had kept him alive through 20 years of violence. Time seemed to slow as Cole evaluated angles, distances, probabilities. The leader was the biggest threat, but also the furthest away. The man by the campfire was distracted. The other 2 were positioned to watch for movement from the rocks where Emma was hidden. "All right," Cole said, raising his hand slightly. "You got me. She's up there in the rocks. But she's just a scared little girl. No need to hurt her." The leader relaxed slightly, which was exactly what Cole had been hoping for. "Now that's more like it. Jimmy, go get her. And be gentle. Damaged goods don't bring full price." As Jimmy started toward the rocks, Cole made his move. He dove for his rifle, rolling behind a boulder as bullets began flying. The desert morning exploded into gunfire and shouting, the peaceful silence shattered by violence. Cole came up firing, his first shot taking down the man who'd been examining the campfire. His second caught Jimmy in the leg, sending him sprawling. But the leader and his remaining companion had taken cover and were laying down steady fire, their bullets chipping stone and kicking up geysers of sand around Cole's position. From somewhere in the rocks above, Cole heard Biscuit whinny in fear. He prayed Emma was staying hidden, staying safe. This was exactly the kind of situation he'd hoped to avoid. A running gunfight with a child caught in the middle. The battle was just beginning, and Cole knew that his rusty skills would be tested against men who made killing their daily business. But as bullets whistled overhead and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, one thought burned clear in his mind. He would not let them take Emma, whatever it cost. Whatever he had to do, he would keep her safe. The gunfight ended as suddenly as it had begun. The leader of the outlaw band lay motionless beside his horse, Cole's final bullet having found its mark with the deadly precision that had once made him feared across 3 territories. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wounded horses and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Cole remained crouched behind the boulder for several long minutes, listening for any sign that more riders might be approaching. When he was satisfied they were alone, he called out softly, "Emma, it's safe now, darling. You can come down." She emerged from the rocks like a small ghost, her face pale but composed. She looked at the bodies scattered around their former campsite with the solemn acceptance of a child who'd seen too much violence in her young life. "Are they dead?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Cole said, checking each man to make sure. He found a silver cross necklace around the leader's neck, an odd thing for such a brutal man to carry. "They won't hurt anybody anymore?" As they gathered their scattered belongings and prepared to leave, Cole found himself shaking, not from fear, but from the memory of how easily the old skills had returned. For a few terrible minutes, he'd been Cole Mercer the gunfighter again, calculating angles of death with the cold efficiency that had once been his trademark. The feel of the gun in his hand, the familiar dance of violence and survival, it had all come rushing back like a river bursting its dam. Emma seemed to sense his turmoil. As they rode away from the blood-soaked campsite, she guided Biscuit closer to Belle and reached out to touch Cole's arm. "Papa says sometimes good men have to do bad things to protect people they love," she said softly. "He says it hurts their hearts, but they do it anyway because they have to." Cole looked down at this remarkable child who seemed to understand things that grown men struggled with. "Your papa sounds like a wise man." "He is, and he's hurt inside, just like you are now. I can see it in your eyes. The same sadness Papa gets after he has to fight the bad men." They rode in companionable silence for a while, following a game trail that wound through increasingly rugged country. The desert was giving way to foothills covered in pine and juniper, and the air had a different quality, cleaner somehow, and touched with the promise of higher elevations. As the afternoon wore on, Cole found himself thinking about his own past in ways he hadn't for years. Emma's simple acceptance of the violence they'd just experienced reminded him of his own daughter, Sarah, who'd possessed that same clear-eyed understanding of right and wrong. "Emma," he said, as they stopped to rest the horses beside a clear mountain stream, "I want you to know something about me, something I haven't told anyone in 20 years. She looked at him with those dark, intelligent eyes, waiting. "I had a daughter once. Her name was Sarah, and she'd be about your age now if she'd lived. She got sick when she was little. Fever took her and her mama both while I was away trying to earn money for medicine." Cole's voice caught slightly. "After they died, I became someone I'm not proud of. A gunfighter, a killer. I thought if I could hurt enough people, maybe it would stop my own hurt from inside." Emma reached over and took his hand with her small one. "Did it work?" "No, darling. It just made everything worse. The more people I hurt, the more I hurt inside. It took me a long time to understand that." He squeezed her hand gently. "But taking care of you these past few days, it's reminded me what it feels like to be a good man again. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "A reason to be better than I was." They continued climbing into the mountains as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The country here was different, wilder, more remote, the kind of place where a man could disappear for years if he needed to. Cole could understand why Blackjack Morrison had chosen this area for his hideout. The Esperanza mine sat in a narrow canyon between two ridges, its entrance partially hidden by a rockfall that looked natural, but had clearly been arranged to conceal the opening. Emma's map had been remarkably accurate, even down to the distinctive bent pine tree that marked the trail leading to the mine. "Papa?" Emma called out as they approached, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Papa, it's me." "I'm here." No answer came from the dark mouth of the mine, but Cole noticed fresh horse tracks in the sandy soil near the entrance. Someone had been here recently, and more than one person. "Stay close to me," Cole murmured, drawing his rifle. Something didn't feel right. The silence was too complete, too careful. They dismounted and approached the mine entrance on foot. Inside, Cole could see the flicker of a small fire deeper in the tunnel, and the smell of wood smoke and coffee drifted out to meet them. "Hello, the mine," Cole called. "We're coming in peaceful." A voice answered from the darkness, weak but unmistakably that of a grown man. "Emma, is that really you, little star?" Emma broke away from Cole and ran into the mine, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. Cole followed more cautiously, his rifle ready. The scene that greeted him in the flickering firelight was both touching and heartbreaking. A man who could only be Blackjack Morrison sat propped against the mine wall, his left arm in a crude sling and his face pale with pain and exhaustion. Despite his condition, his eyes lit up like Christmas morning as Emma threw herself into his arms. "Papa!" "Oh, Papa, I was so scared." "I know, little star." "I know." Blackjack held his daughter with his good arm, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I've been looking for you everywhere. When I found the wagon wrecked and you gone..." His voice broke. Cole stepped into the circle of firelight, and Blackjack's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. But Emma quickly intervened. "No, Papa. This is Cole. He saved me. He took care of me when I was lost, and he brought me here to find you." Blackjack studied Cole carefully, taking in the rifle, the trail-worn clothes, the weathered face that had seen its share of hard living. "You're the one who's been protecting my daughter?" "Yes, sir. Name's Cole Mercer." Recognition flickered in Blackjack's eyes. "Mercer, I know that name. You used to run with—" "Yeah, I did. But that was a long time ago." Cole lowered his rifle. "Your daughter's been telling me some interesting things about you, Morrison. Things that don't match up with what the wanted posters say." Blackjack laughed bitterly. "Those posters don't tell the whole story. But then again, they never do." He winced as Emma settled against his wounded side. How much did she tell you?" "Enough to know you're not the man those bounty hunters think you are." Cole set his rifle aside and crouched by the fire. "She told me about your wife, about the corruption in Verde Valley, about why you started redistributing that stolen money. Sarah was everything good in this world," Blackjack said softly, his hand stroking Emma's hair. "When those bastards killed her just to get to me—" He stopped, his jaw clenching with old pain. "A man can only take so much before he stops caring about the law and starts caring about justice." Cole understood that feeling better than he cared to admit. "How bad is that arm?" "Bullet went clean through, but it's been 3 days and it's not healing right. Probably infected." Blackjack's face was flushed with fever, and Cole could see the telltale signs of a man fighting off blood poisoning. "We need to get you to a doctor." "Can't. Every doctor between here and Mexico knows my face by now. Besides, those bounty hunters you tangled with, they're not the only ones looking for us. Sheriff Caldwell's got half the territory covered." "Caldwell?" "The man behind all this. He's been running a protection racket across 3 counties, using his badge to legitimize theft and murder. When I started hitting his operations, returning his stolen money to the people he'd robbed, he put out that bounty to make me look like the criminal." Blackjack's eyes hardened. $50,000 is a lot of money. Makes men do things they might not otherwise do. Cole felt the weight of that statement. He'd been tempted by that same bounty, had considered for one brief moment what $50,000 could mean to a man like him. The fact that he'd chosen differently didn't erase the fact that the temptation had been there. "There's something else," Blackjack continued, his voice growing weaker. "Caldwell's not just after the money I took back from his victims. There's evidence, documents that prove what he's been doing. Sarah hid them before she died, and Emma's the only one who knows where they are." Emma looked up at her father with worried eyes. "Papa, you're getting sicker." "I know, little star. But we're together now. That's what matters." Cole studied the man before him, wounded, feverish, but still fighting to protect his daughter and expose the corruption that had destroyed his life. This wasn't the cold-blooded killer described on the wanted posters. This was a father and a teacher who'd been pushed beyond his limits by circumstances no decent man should have to face. "Those documents," Cole said. "Where are they?" Emma and her father exchanged a look. "Mama hid them in our old schoolhouse," Emma said finally, "behind a loose board near the teacher's desk. She made me memorize exactly where, in case something happened to her and Papa." "Verde Valley's 100 miles south of here," Blackjack said. "Right in the heart of Caldwell's territory. It might as well be on the moon." Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire and thinking. Those documents could clear Blackjack's name, expose Caldwell's crimes, and give Emma back her father. But getting them would mean riding into the most dangerous territory in Arizona, with every gun in 3 counties looking for them. On the other hand, staying here meant watching Blackjack die slowly from infection while bounty hunters closed in from all sides. And eventually they'd be found. Men like Wade Garrett didn't give up when there was $50,000 at stake. "There might be another way," Cole said finally. "But it would mean trusting someone neither of you has any reason to trust." "What do you mean?" Cole thought about Doc Harrison, about his quiet courage in warning them about Garrett's plans, about Martha's kindness in providing clothes for Emma, about the fundamental decency that still existed in some people, even in this hard country. There's a federal marshal been tracking your case. Man named Webb. He's not like the others. He's after the truth, not just the bounty. If we could get word to him, maybe convince him to look at those documents. How do you know about Webb? Blackjack's eyes sharpened with suspicion. Because he's not the only one with a past. He'd rather keep buried, Cole said quietly. Let's just say our paths might have crossed before, in an official capacity. The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. Blackjack studied Cole's face carefully, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. You're not just a drifter, are you, Mercer? None of us are just what we appear to be, Cole replied. The question is, are you willing to trust me to get those documents? Because if your daughter's right about what they contain, they might be the only thing that can save all our lives. The burned bank ledger lay open on the stone floor of the mine, its charred pages telling a story of systematic corruption that made Cole's stomach turn. Blackjack had retrieved it from his saddlebags with his good hand. The effort obviously painful but necessary. Sarah found this in Caldwell's office the night before she died, Blackjack said, his voice barely above a whisper. She was trying to find evidence of what he'd been doing to our community. Look at these entries. Cole studied the partially burned pages by firelight. Even damaged, the ledger revealed a pattern of forced loans, foreclosed properties, and businesses seized under false pretenses. Names Cole recognized from Emma's stories: farmers, shopkeepers, widows, all systematically robbed by men who wore badges and claimed to represent justice. Your wife was a brave woman, Cole said, too brave for her own good. She thought she could reason with Caldwell, show him these documents, and convince him to make things right. Blackjack's jaw tightened. Instead, he had her shot down in the street like a dog. Made it look like a robbery gone wrong. Emma had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder, exhausted by the day's journey and the emotional reunion. In the flickering firelight, she looked even younger than her 9 years. Her face peaceful despite all the violence and fear she'd witnessed. She doesn't know the whole truth about her mother's death, does she? Cole asked quietly. She knows enough. Knows her mama died trying to help people, and that the men responsible are still out there. That's all a child needs to carry. Blackjack adjusted his arm around his daughter, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. What about you, Mercer? What's your story? Emma said you lost a daughter. Cole found himself telling this virtual stranger things he'd never spoken aloud. About Sarah's death, about the years of violence that followed, about the long road toward redemption that had led him to that desert morning when he'd found a frightened little girl. There was something about the mine's isolated silence and Blackjack's fevered candor that invited honesty. Funny how life comes full circle, Blackjack said when Cole finished. Here we both are, two broken men trying to protect the same child for the same reasons. What do you mean? Emma reminds you of your daughter. I can see it in how you look at her, how careful you are with her feelings. And me, he coughed, the sound hollow in the confined space. I'm not going to make it out of these mountains, Cole. This fever's getting worse, and we both know what that means. Cole wanted to deny it, but the signs were unmistakable. Blackjack's breathing was shallow and labored, his skin hot to the touch despite the cool mountain air. Even if they could get him to a doctor, it might already be too late. There's still time. No, there isn't. And you know it. Blackjack's voice was calm, matter of fact. But Emma still has a chance. Those documents could clear my name, expose Caldwell, maybe even set up a trust fund from the recovered money to take care of her future. But someone's got to get them to the right people. The weight of what Blackjack was asking settled over Cole like a lead blanket. Verde Valley was a death trap, crawling with Caldwell's men and bounty hunters. Getting in and out alive would require skills Cole hadn't used in 20 years, and even then, the odds would be heavily stacked against him. But looking at Emma sleeping peacefully against her dying father's chest, Cole knew he didn't have a choice. This child had given him back his humanity, reminded him what it meant to care about something beyond his own survival. He owed her more than he could ever repay. I'll need you to draw me a map, Cole said finally. Every detail you can remember about Verde Valley. where Caldwell's men patrol, which buildings they watch, the best way in and out of town. Blackjack nodded, relief evident in his fevered eyes. There's more. The schoolhouse isn't the only place Sarah hid evidence. She was careful, spread things around in case some of it was discovered. There's also a safety deposit box in the Tucson Territorial Bank, registered under her maiden name. He reached into his shirt with his good hand and pulled out a small brass key. Sarah Williams. Box number 247. Whatever's in there, she thought it was important enough to risk her life protecting. Cole took the key, feeling its weight like a sacred trust. What about Emma? I can't take her with me to Verde Valley. There's a mission school in Santa Rosa, about 50 miles west of here, run by Sister Mary Catherine. She's good people, doesn't ask too many questions. Emma would be safe there while you... Blackjack stopped, seized by another coughing fit that brought up specks of blood. Papa. Emma stirred, instantly awake and alert to her father's distress. I'm all right, little star. Just tired, but Cole could see the truth in Blackjack's eyes. He had maybe a day or two left, possibly less. The infection was spreading faster than his body could fight it off, and the fever was starting to affect his thinking. They spent the next hour planning Cole's mission to Verde Valley. Blackjack's knowledge of Caldwell's operations was extensive. He'd been studying his enemy for months, learning patrol patterns and identifying weaknesses. The schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, abandoned since the community had been driven into poverty by Caldwell's schemes. Getting in would be relatively easy. Getting out alive would be the challenge. There's something else you need to know, Blackjack said, as Emma dozed fitfully beside him. Caldwell's got a personal interest in this, beyond just the money. His brother was one of the men I killed when they came for Sarah. He wants me dead, not just for the bounty, but for revenge. How many men does he have? 20, maybe 30. All hard cases, all willing to shoot first and ask questions later. But they're spread thin across 3 counties, and most of them are out looking for us up here in the mountains. Blackjack's voice was getting weaker. If you move fast, hit Verde Valley, while they're focused on the search, you might have a chance. Cole spent the rest of the night preparing for what might be the most dangerous mission of his life. He cleaned and loaded his weapons, studied the maps Blackjack had drawn, and tried to prepare himself mentally for a return to the violent skills he'd worked so hard to leave behind. As dawn approached, Blackjack's condition worsened. His fever spiked higher, and he began drifting in and out of consciousness. During his lucid moments, he spoke to Emma in whispers, telling her stories about her mother, reminding her of lessons he'd taught her, trying to pack a lifetime of fatherly love into their remaining hours together. Promise me something, he said to Cole during one of these intervals. If something happens to me, don't let her blame herself. Children always think they could have done something different, saved someone they loved. Don't let her carry that weight, Cole nodded, understanding the request from painful personal experience. I promise. And when this is all over, when Caldwell's brought to justice, find her a good family. People who'll love her and give her the life she deserves. She's got her mother's heart and her grandfather's mind. She could be anything she wants to be, given the chance. Outside the mine, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was time for Cole to begin his journey to Verde Valley. Time to risk everything for a chance at justice and redemption. But first, he had to say goodbye to a dying man who'd become something like a friend, and prepare a 9-year-old girl for the hardest loss of her young life. Cole was saddling Belle for the dangerous ride to Verde Valley when he heard the sound of approaching horses echoing through the canyon. His hand moved instinctively to his rifle, but something about the measured pace of the hoofbeats made him pause. This wasn't the desperate urgency of bounty hunters or the predatory approach of outlaws. This sounded almost official. Stay in the mine, he called to Emma, who had emerged at the first sound of riders. And keep your papa quiet. The rider who appeared at the mouth of the canyon was alone, a tall man on a sturdy roan horse. He wore a long coat despite the warming morning air, and something about his bearing, the straight spine, The alert way his eyes swept the terrain spoke of military training and law enforcement experience. "Marshal Webb," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Marcus Webb. I'm looking for Cole Mercer." Cole's blood turned to ice water. His real name, his old name, hadn't been spoken aloud by anyone for 20 years. The identity he'd buried in that tombstone saloon fire had just risen from the ashes like a vengeful ghost. "You've got the wrong man," Cole called back, his rifle trained on the approaching marshal. "Name's Cole, but you can keep riding." Webb raised his hands slightly, showing they were empty. "Deputy Marshal Cole Mercer, badge number 247, served under Chief Marshal William Henderson in the New Mexico Territory from 1858 to 1865. Presumed dead in the Tombstone Fire of 1866. But we both know that's not true, don't we?" The hidden weight of the badge Cole still carried, wrapped in oilcloth and buried deep in his saddlebags, seemed to burn against his consciousness. He'd kept it all these years, unable to throw away the last remnant of the man he'd once been proud to be. "That man died a long time ago," Cole said. "Maybe he did. But Cole Mercer, the gunfighter, has been making quite a reputation for himself since then. 23 confirmed kills in organized duels, another 15 in self-defense situations, and enough close calls to make him a legend from Texas to California." Webb dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Course that man seems to have disappeared too, around 10 years ago. Wonder what happened to him." Emma had disobeyed orders and crept to the mine entrance, her dark eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Cole, who is that man? How does he know you?" Webb's attention shifted to the little girl, and his expression softened. "You must be Emma Morrison. I've been looking for you for a very long time, young lady." "Your father sent me?" "That's a lie," Cole said sharply. "Her father's dying in that mine from a bullet wound." "He didn't send anybody." "Jack Morrison didn't send me," Webb corrected. "Your grandfather did. Judge Samuel Morrison of the Federal District Court in Santa Fe." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her face going pale. "Grandpa Sam? But Papa said he was dead. Said he died in the war." Webb shook his head sadly. "Your father told you that to protect you. Judge Morrison is very much alive, and he's been searching for you and your father for 2 years. Ever since he learned that his son was still alive and had a granddaughter he'd never met." The pieces began falling into place in Cole's mind, forming a picture that changed everything he thought he knew about this situation. "Black Jack Morrison isn't an outlaw at all, is he?" "Deputy U.S. Marshal Jackson Samuel Morrison," Webb confirmed. "Working undercover for the past 3 years to gather evidence against the corruption network operating across Arizona Territory. His wife, Dr. Sarah Morrison, was his contact and evidence coordinator. When she was murdered, Jack was forced to go deeper undercover to complete the mission. Emma's legs gave out, and she sank to the ground near the mine entrance. "Papa's a marshal?" "Like you. Like both of us," Webb said, looking directly at Cole. "And so are you, Deputy Mercer. Your commission was never officially revoked. Chief Marshal Henderson always hoped you'd come back when you were ready." Cole felt the world shifting beneath his feet. Everything he'd believed about himself, about his exile from law enforcement, about the man he'd become, all of it was crumbling like a house built on sand. "I killed people," he said hoarsely. "After I left the service, I became everything I'd sworn to fight against." "You survived," Webb said simply, "in a hard country during hard times, using the only skills you had. But every man you faced in those duels was a killer himself. Every life you took in self-defense was protecting innocent people. You never once hired your gun to murder. Never once took money to hurt someone who didn't deserve it." The marshal reached into his coat and pulled out a familiar piece of paper, the wanted poster for Black Jack Morrison. But this one was different. Across the bottom, in official federal script, were the words, "Cancel all bounties. Subject is federal agent." "We've been trying to get word to the bounty hunters for weeks," Webb explained. "But Caldwell's got too many men on his payroll, including some in the Territorial Telegraph Office. Messages have been intercepted. Our own people have been ambushed. That's why I came myself." Emma stood up slowly, her young face struggling to process this revelation. The $50,000 was placed by Sheriff Caldwell to discredit your father's investigation. Every bounty hunter chasing Jack Morrison was actually helping the very criminals your father was trying to expose. Webb's expression darkened. Caldwell's been playing a very sophisticated game, using the territorial bounty system to eliminate federal investigators. From inside the mine came a weak voice. Webb! Marcus Webb? Is that really you? The marshal's face lit up with relief. Jack! Thank God you're alive. Cole stepped aside as Webb hurried into the mine, Emma close behind him. The reunion between the two federal marshals was emotional but brief. Blackjack's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and there wasn't much time. I've got the evidence, Blackjack whispered, gripping Webb's hand with surprising strength. Sarah hid documents in 3 locations before they killed her. The schoolhouse in Verde Valley, a safety deposit box in Tucson, and he looked at Emma with love and pride. My brilliant daughter memorized a list of names and amounts. 57 victims, nearly $200,000 in stolen property. Webb turned to Emma with amazement. You memorized all that? Emma nodded solemnly. Mama made me practice every night before bed. She said if anything happened to her and Papa, I'd be the only one who could make sure the bad men got punished. The magnitude of what this child had been carrying became clear to Cole. She wasn't just a frightened little girl caught in the middle of adult conflicts. She was a crucial witness, the living repository of evidence that could bring down one of the largest corruption networks in territorial history. There's more, Blackjack continued, his voice growing weaker. Caldwell's not working alone. He's got federal backing. Someone in Washington has been protecting him, making sure investigations get buried or redirected. Webb's face went grim. Who? Don't know yet. But the money trail leads back to a congressional appropriation for territorial development. Someone's been using federal funds to finance Caldwell's operation. Cole felt the weight of his hidden badge calling to him from his saddlebags. For 20 years, he'd run from his responsibilities, convinced that he'd forfeited the right to wear a star. But looking at Emma's brave face, at Blackjack's determination to see justice done, even as his life ebbed away, Cole realized that some duties transcended personal guilt and shame. What do you need me to do, Marshal Webb? He asked formally. Webb smiled, the first genuine smile Cole had seen from him. I need you to be who you were always meant to be, Deputy Mercer. A United States Marshal protecting innocent people from the wolves who prey on them. He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver star, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. This was your father's badge, Jack. I thought Emma might like to see her family's legacy. As Emma held her grandfather's marshal's badge up to the firelight, its silver surface reflecting the flames like captured starlight, Cole made a decision that would change the rest of his life. He walked to his saddlebags, pulled out the oilcloth-wrapped bundle he'd carried for 2 decades, and unwrapped his own tarnished badge. For the first time in 20 years, Deputy U.S. Marshal Cole Mercer pinned a star to his chest. The telegraph key clicked steadily in the pre-dawn darkness, its metallic voice carrying across the mountain wilderness to federal offices in Santa Fe, Denver, and Washington. Webb had brought the portable field telegraph with him, knowing that communication would be crucial to the success of their mission. Cole watched the marshal's fingers work the key with practiced precision, sending coded messages that would alert federal authorities to the situation in Arizona Territory. Each click was like a nail being driven into Sheriff Caldwell's coffin, evidence of corruption, murder, and conspiracy that would bring the full weight of federal justice down on his operation. That's the last of it, Webb said, finally lifting his fingers from the key. Every piece of evidence we have is now documented in federal records. Even if something happens to us, the investigation will continue. Blackjack had passed away peacefully 2 hours before dawn. His hand in Emma's, and his final words, a whispered blessing for the daughter he'd fought so hard to protect. Emma had grieved quietly, with the stoic dignity of a child who'd learned too young that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. Now she sat by the mine entrance, sketching her father's peaceful face by the light of the rising sun. "She's remarkable," Webb said softly, watching the little girl work. 9 years old, and she's carrying evidence that could topple a federal corruption ring. Most grown men couldn't handle that kind of pressure. "She's her father's daughter," Cole replied. "And her grandfather's too, from what you've told me. Judge Samuel Morrison's granddaughter was indeed a remarkable child. Over the past hour, she'd recited from memory a detailed accounting of Caldwell's crimes. Names, dates, amounts stolen, properties seized under false pretenses. Her recall was perfect, her delivery clear and precise. The list painted a picture of systematic theft that had impoverished dozens of families and businesses across 3 counties. The question now," Webb continued, "is how we get her safely out of these mountains. Caldwell's got search parties scattered across 50 square miles, and they're getting closer." Cole had been thinking about that problem since before Blackjack died. The canyon where the mine was located provided good defensive cover, but it was also a trap. One way in, one way out, and if Caldwell's men found them here, there would be no escape. "We could try to slip past them," he said. "Travel at night, use game trails, avoid the main routes." With a 9-year-old girl? "Through country crawling with armed men who shoot first and ask questions later." Webb shook his head. "Too risky. If we got caught in the open, Emma would be defenseless. Then we make our stand here." Webb raised an eyebrow. 2 men against 30? Those aren't good odds. They're better than you think. This canyon's a natural fortress. Narrow approaches, high walls, plenty of cover. And we've got advantages they don't know about." Cole gestured toward the mine entrance. "That tunnel connects to 3 other shafts. Emma's father showed me the layout last night. We could move through the mountain without being seen, hit them from unexpected angles. You're talking about a guerrilla campaign. I'm talking about survival. And justice." Cole's voice hardened with resolve. "Caldwell's men aren't soldiers, they're thugs. They're used to intimidating farmers and shopkeepers, not fighting trained lawmen in prepared positions. We can use that." Emma looked up from her sketching, her dark eyes serious. "What about me? What can I do to help?" Both men started to protest, but she cut them off with a gesture that reminded Cole painfully of her father's quiet authority. "I know these mountains better than anyone except Papa," she said firmly. "I know where all the old mine shafts connect, where the water sources are, which trails lead where. You'd need me." Webb looked uncomfortable with the idea of involving a child in what was essentially a military operation, but Cole recognized the truth in Emma's words. She wasn't just a victim to be protected. She was a valuable ally with knowledge they couldn't afford to ignore. "She stays in the safest parts of the tunnel system," Cole said finally. "And she only moves when we're absolutely certain the route is secure. But yes, we can use her help." They spent the next hour planning their defense of the canyon. The mine's interior was a maze of interconnected tunnels and chambers, carved out over 20 years of copper extraction. Emma drew them a detailed map of the underground passages, showing how they could move from the main entrance to secondary exits on the canyon's eastern wall. "Papa and I explored every inch of these tunnels," she said, her finger tracing routes on the paper. "There's a chamber here." She pointed to a spot near the canyon's rear wall, where you can see both approaches to the mine. "And here's a passage that comes out behind those big rocks, where someone attacking would take cover." Cole studied the map with growing appreciation for Blackjack Morrison's strategic thinking. The man had chosen this location not just as a hideout, but as a fortress. With proper preparation, 2 men could indeed hold off a much larger force. Webb was examining his ammunition supplies, 2 rifles, 4 pistols, and enough bullets for a sustained firefight. "I've got about 100 rounds total. What about you?" 60, maybe 70. Plus some dynamite I found in the mine. Cole had discovered the explosives during his exploration of the tunnels, old mining charges that were still stable enough to use. "We can use it to block passages, or as a last resort if they try to rush us. You really think they'll find us here?" "I know they will. Question is when and how many they'll bring." Cole looked out at the canyon entrance, calculating angles and distances. "Best case, they send a small scouting party first. Worst case, Caldwell comes with his full force. Emma had been listening to their preparations with the focused attention of a child who understood that her life depended on the adults around her making smart decisions. Now she spoke up with a suggestion that showed wisdom beyond her years. What if we don't wait for them to find us? What if we let them know where we are? Both marshals stared at her. Explain, Webb said. Papa always said the best way to fight a bigger enemy was to make them fight on your terms, not theirs. Right now, they're searching everywhere, which means their men are spread out. But if they knew exactly where we were, they'd concentrate their forces here, Cole finished, understanding her logic. Bring everyone to one place where we're ready for them. Exactly. And while they're all here fighting us, they can't hurt other people or steal more money or, Emma's voice caught slightly, kill any more mamas. The simple wisdom of her strategy was brilliant in its clarity. Instead of playing defense, waiting for Caldwell's men to hunt them down piece by piece, they could force a decisive confrontation on ground of their choosing. Webb nodded slowly. It's crazy enough to work, but how do we get word to them without revealing our defensive preparations? Cole was already reaching for his saddlebags. Same way we've been communicating all along. We leave them a trail to follow. He pulled out one of Emma's drawings, a landscape sketch that clearly showed the distinctive rock formations around the mine entrance. With a few careful additions, he made it look like a map, complete with notations about safe routes and water sources. We leave this where one of their scouting parties will find it, he said. Make it look like Blackjack dropped it during his escape. They'll think they found his hideout, and then we make them pay for trespassing. Webb added grimly. Emma watched them finalize their plans, with the same serious attention she'd given to memorizing her mother's evidence lists. When they finished, she made one more request that surprised both men. I want to learn to shoot, she said firmly. Papa always said I was too young, but things are different now. I need to be able to protect myself. Cole looked at this remarkable child, an orphan who'd lost both parents to violence, who carried the weight of crucial evidence that could bring justice to dozens of families, who was facing the possibility of death with more courage than most grown men could muster. All right, he said finally, but you only use a gun as a last resort when there's no other choice. And you never ever hesitate to pull the trigger if someone's trying to hurt you. Understood? Emma nodded solemnly. Understood. As the sun climbed higher over the canyon walls, painting the red rock in shades of gold and crimson, the three of them made their final preparations for what would likely be the most important battle of their lives. Emma practiced with Cole's smaller pistol, her small hands steady as she learned to sight and fire. Webb positioned himself in the hidden chamber Emma had shown them, where he could cover both approaches to the mine. Cole took the most dangerous position, the mine entrance itself, where he'd be the first target when Caldwell's men arrived. The fake map was placed where it would be easily found by searching riders. The telegraph key was hidden deep in the tunnel system, along with copies of all their evidence. If they didn't survive the coming fight, at least the truth would live on. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the canyon floor, Emma took her father's place at the mine entrance, keeping watch while the two marshals caught a few hours of rest. She was still just a child, but the events of the past week had forged her into something stronger, a survivor, a witness, and now a defender of justice. The battle for the truth was about to begin. They came at sunset, when the canyon walls glowed red like the inside of a forge, and shadows stretched long across the desert floor. Cole counted 12 riders approaching from the south, moving with the confident arrogance of men who believed they held all the advantages. Sheriff Caldwell rode at their head, a big man with silver hair and the kind of face that looked honest until you saw his eyes. Those eyes were cold and calculating, the eyes of a predator who'd grown fat on other people's misery. He wore his badge like a crown, polished bright and positioned where everyone could see his authority. Jack Morrison. Caldwell's voice echoed off the canyon walls as his men spread out in a loose semicircle around the mine entrance. I know you're in there. Come out with your hands up and the girl unharmed, and maybe we can work something out. Cole remained hidden behind the natural rock barrier at the mine's mouth, his rifle ready but not yet visible. 50 yards away, Webb waited in the concealed chamber Emma had shown them, positioned to catch any attackers in a crossfire. Emma herself was deep in the tunnel system, safe but ready to move through the underground passages if needed. "I said, come out, Morrison," Caldwell called again. "You're surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Cole stepped into view, but remained in the shadows of the mine entrance. "Morrison's dead, Caldwell. Has been for 3 days. It's just me now." Well, and who might you be?" "Name's Cole Mercer. You might have heard of me." Even at 50 yards, Cole could see Caldwell's face change as recognition dawned. The corrupt sheriff had done his homework. He knew exactly who Cole Mercer was and what he was capable of. "The gunfighter," Caldwell said slowly. "Heard you were dead. I got better." Cole's voice carried the flat, emotionless tone that had once struck fear into the hearts of men across 3 territories. "Question is, what brings a county sheriff 50 miles outside his jurisdiction?" "Federal bounty hunting. Perfectly legal." But Caldwell's confident tone had faltered slightly. He'd expected to find a wounded outlaw and a frightened child, not a legendary gunfighter in a prepared defensive position. "Funny thing about that bounty," Cole continued, his rifle still hidden but ready. "Seems it's been cancelled. Federal marshals put out word yesterday that Jack Morrison was working undercover. Course you probably already knew that." Caldwell's men shifted nervously in their saddles. They were hard cases and killers, but they weren't stupid. The name Cole Mercer carried weight in this country, and none of them wanted to be the first to test whether the stories were true. "Don't know what you're talking about," Caldwell said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Morrison was an outlaw, plain and simple. The bounty stands." "No, it doesn't." The new voice came from the rocks to the east, where Webb had positioned himself. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Marcus Webb, Sheriff Caldwell. You're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and violations of federal anti-corruption statutes." The situation had suddenly become more complicated than Caldwell had bargained for. Instead of cornering a wounded outlaw, he found himself facing 2 federal lawmen in strong defensive positions. His men looked to him for orders, but for the first time, the corrupt sheriff seemed uncertain. "Federal marshals got no authority here," he said finally. "This is county business. Murder of a federal agent makes it federal business," Webb replied. "Dr. Sarah Morrison was killed while gathering evidence of your criminal activities. That makes you and every man riding with you accessories to the murder of a federal officer." Cole watched Caldwell's face carefully, seeing the moment when arrogance gave way to desperation. A cornered wolf was more dangerous than a confident one, and Caldwell was realizing that his elaborate conspiracy was unraveling. "Boys," Caldwell said to his men, "looks like we got ourselves a situation. These federal boys seem to think they can waltz into my county and throw accusations around. What do you think we should do about that?" The response was predictable. Guns began appearing in hands, men spreading out to flank the mine entrance. Cole had seen this moment coming from the beginning. Words were finished. Now it would be settled with bullets. "Last chance, Caldwell," Webb called out. "Surrender now and testify against whoever's backing you, and maybe you live to see a courtroom." Caldwell's answer came in the form of a signal to his men. The canyon exploded into violence as 12 guns opened fire simultaneously, muzzle flashes lighting up the gathering dusk like deadly fireflies. Cole was already in motion, diving behind the rock barrier as bullets whined through the space where he'd been standing. His rifle came up smoothly, and his first shot took down the man on Caldwell's left, a clean hit that dropped the rider from his saddle like a sack of grain. From his concealed position, Webb opened fire on the men trying to circle around the eastern approach. His shots were deliberate and accurate, forcing the attackers to seek cover rather than advance. The stick of dynamite Cole had prepared came in handy sooner than expected. As 3 of Caldwell's men tried to rush the mine entrance, Cole lit the fuse and rolled the explosive toward their position. The blast shook the entire canyon, bringing down part of the rock face and temporarily blinding everyone with dust and debris. When the dust cleared, the odds had shifted dramatically. 4 of Caldwell's men were down, 2 more were wounded, and the rest were having serious second thoughts about their career choices. This wasn't the easy capture they'd been promised. This was a war, but Caldwell himself was still very much alive, and still very much determined to see this through. He'd invested too much in his criminal empire to walk away now, and he knew that capture meant a federal gallows. "Burn them out," he shouted to his remaining men. "Set fire to the mine entrance. Smoke them out like the rats they are." Emma's drawing of her family, the one she'd been working on that morning, lay crumpled in Cole's shirt pocket as bullets whistled overhead. The simple sketch of her parents and herself, all holding hands under a bright sun, had become his talisman, his reminder of what he was fighting for. The battle for the canyon was entering its second hour. Caldwell's men had tried rushing the mine entrance twice more, only to be driven back by accurate rifle fire and Cole's strategic use of the remaining dynamite. But they'd adapted, spreading out along the canyon rim, where they could fire down into the mine area from relative safety. "They're trying to get above us," Webb called from his position. "If they reach the canyon rim, they'll have us trapped." Cole could see the movement. 3 men working their way up the eastern wall, using handholds and ledges that Emma had shown them during her exploration of the mine area. Once they reached the top, they'd be able to fire straight down into the mine entrance. "I'm going after them," Cole shouted back. "Too dangerous. They'll cut you down in the open." But Cole was already moving, using the underground passages Emma had mapped out. The tunnel system was more extensive than he'd initially realized, with connections that allowed him to emerge at several points along the canyon wall. He could reach the eastern approach before Caldwell's climbers made it to the top. The passage was narrow and dark, lit only by the small lantern he carried. His boots echoed hollowly on the stone floor as he worked his way through the mountain's interior, following Emma's careful directions. The child's knowledge of these tunnels was proving invaluable. Without her guidance, he would have been lost in the maze of shafts and chambers. He emerged from a hidden opening just as the first climber reached a ledge 30 feet above the canyon floor. The man was so focused on his ascent that he never saw Cole's muzzle flash. The shot echoed like thunder in the confined space, and the climber fell backward into empty air. The other 2 men spotted Cole immediately and opened fire, their bullets chipping stone from the canyon wall around him. But they were shooting upward from awkward positions while trying to maintain their handholds. Their accuracy was poor, while Cole had solid footing and clear sightlines. His second shot wounded one of the climbers, sending him scrambling back down the wall. The third man gave up his attempt and fled along a narrow ledge, disappearing around a bend in the canyon. From the main battle area came the sound of increased gunfire. Webb was holding his position, but Caldwell's remaining men were pressing their attack with desperate intensity. They knew that federal reinforcements would eventually arrive, and their only chance was to finish this quickly. Cole made his way back through the tunnels, moving toward the sound of fighting. When he emerged near Webb's position, he found the marshal reloading with quick, practiced movements. "How many left?" Cole asked. 5, maybe 6. "Plus Caldwell himself." Webb's face was grim. "But they're getting smarter. They're not charging blindly anymore. They're using coordinated fire and movement." As if to prove his point, gunfire erupted from 3 different positions simultaneously. Caldwell's men had spread out in a rough line across the canyon floor, each man covering the others as they advanced by bounds. It was military tactics, suggesting that some of these men had seen real combat. "We can't hold this position much longer," Webb said. "They'll overrun us eventually." Cole was thinking the same thing. Despite their defensive advantages, they were still outnumbered and running low on ammunition. Caldwell's men could afford to waste bullets. Cole and Webb could not. Then he heard Emma's voice calling from deep within the mine. "Cole! Marshal Webb! Come quick!" Both men looked at each other with alarm. Emma was supposed to be in the deepest, safest part of the tunnel system. What could have drawn her forward? Webb covered Cole as he made his way back into the mine, following Emma's voice through the winding passages. He found her in a chamber he hadn't seen before, one that overlooked the canyon through a natural opening in the rock face. "Look," she said, pointing through the opening. Cole peered out and felt his heart leap with hope. Riders were approaching from the north, at least 20 men in the blue uniforms of territorial cavalry, led by an officer on a white horse. "How did they—" Cole began. Emma held up the portable telegraph key. "I've been listening to the signals just like Papa taught me. When I heard them calling for help, I sent messages back. I told them exactly where we are and how many bad men we're fighting." The child had not only memorized her mother's evidence lists and her father's map, she'd also learned enough telegraph operation to communicate with federal authorities during a running gun battle. "You remarkable little girl," Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. The arrival of cavalry changed everything. Caldwell's men found themselves caught between the disciplined fire of federal troops and the defensive positions of the two marshals. The corrupt sheriff made one last desperate attempt to escape, spurring his horse toward the canyon's southern exit, but Cole was waiting for him, positioned where the narrow passage opened onto the desert beyond. For the first time in 20 years, he faced an enemy not as a gunfighter seeking redemption, but as a federal marshal protecting innocent people. The confrontation was brief and decisive. Caldwell's draw was fast, but Cole's was faster and more accurate. The corrupt sheriff fell from his saddle. His reign of terror ended by the same swift justice he'd perverted for so many years. As the gunfire finally stopped and the canyon fell quiet, Emma emerged from the mine carrying her father's badge and her own small bundle of possessions. She walked with quiet dignity toward the approaching cavalry, ready to tell her story to federal authorities and ensure that justice was finally served. 3 months later, the morning sun painted the walls of the small ranch house in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the carefully tended garden where Emma knelt among the tomato plants. Her hands, once marked by the calluses of hardship, now bore the gentler marks of honest work, soil under her fingernails, small scratches from rose thorns, the satisfied weariness that came from nurturing growing things. The new deputy marshal badge lay on the kitchen table where Cole had placed it the night before, its silver surface polished to a mirror shine. Federal investigators had not only cleared Blackjack Morrison's name, but had also offered Cole a full reinstatement with honors and a promotion to senior deputy. The badge represented everything he'd once thought lost forever: respectability, purpose, a chance to serve justice rather than flee from it. But Cole found himself staring out the window at Emma more than he looked at the badge. In the months since Caldwell's death and the exposure of the corruption network, the federal courts had worked with remarkable speed to restore stolen property and compensate victims. Emma, as the sole heir to her father's estate and the recipient of a substantial reward for her testimony, was now a wealthy young woman. More importantly, she was safe, loved, and finally able to be the child she'd never had the chance to be. The ranch they'd purchased together sat in a valley 20 miles south of Santa Fe, far enough from the violence of their shared past, but close enough to civilization for Emma to attend the territorial school. Judge Samuel Morrison, Emma's grandfather, visited every few weeks, bringing books and stories and the kind of grandfatherly affection that helped heal old wounds. He'd also brought legal papers that made Cole Emma's official guardian, a formality that recognized what had already become true in their hearts. "Morning, darling," Cole said as he stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee and watching Emma examine a particularly large tomato with the serious attention she brought to everything she cared about. "Morning, Cole?" She looked up with a smile that still caught him off guard with its brightness. "The garden's doing real good. Miss Catherine says we'll have enough vegetables to share with the neighbors." Miss Catherine was their nearest neighbor, a widow woman who'd taken Emma under her wing and taught her the domestic skills that frontier life required. But Emma had proven gifted at more than just gardening and housework. Her artistic talents had flourished in the safety and stability of their new life, and her room was filled with sketches and paintings that captured the beauty of their valley with remarkable skill. "What do you think about this?" Cole asked, showing her the badge. Marshall Webb says I can start next month if I want. Based out of Santa Fe, covering the Northern Territories, Emma studied the badge with the same thoughtful expression she'd once reserved for her father's maps and her mother's evidence lists. Do you want to take it? Part of me does. 20 years ago, being a federal marshal was the most important thing in my life. It meant something, protecting people, upholding justice, making sure the law served everybody equally. He paused, watching a red-winged blackbird settle on the fence post nearby. But another part of me thinks maybe I've done enough fighting for one lifetime. What does your heart tell you? The question was so like something Blackjack Morrison might have asked that Cole had to smile. Emma had inherited more than her father's intelligence and her mother's compassion. She'd also inherited their gift for seeing straight. To the heart of complicated matters, my heart tells me that the most important job I'll ever have is right here, Cole said quietly. Raising you, teaching you, making sure you get the chance to become whoever you want to be. Emma stood up, brushing dirt from her dress, and walked over to where Cole sat on the porch steps. She was taller now, her face filling out with the good health that came from regular meals and peaceful sleep. But her eyes still held the wisdom that hardship had forced upon her, tempered now with the joy that safety and love had restored. Papa used to say that good men serve where they're needed most, she said, settling beside him on the step. Maybe you could do both, be a marshal sometimes, and be my guardian all the time. Cole looked at this remarkable young woman who'd somehow become the center of his world, who'd given him back his faith in humanity and his belief in the possibility of redemption. You know what? That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The badge went into his shirt pocket, but not as a symbol of duty or obligation. Instead, it became what it should have been all along, a tool for protecting the people he loved and serving the justice he believed in. That afternoon, Emma set up her easel in the garden and began work on a new painting. This one showed their ranch house with its red roof and white walls, surrounded by the vegetable garden and the cottonwood trees that lined the creek. In the foreground, she painted two figures, a tall man and a young girl working side by side in the garden, their shadows long in the afternoon sun. At the bottom of the canvas, in careful script, she wrote, "Home." As evening approached and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Cole found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this place. The violence and loss, the mistakes and regrets, the long road toward redemption that had led him to a frightened little girl in the desert. It all seemed like chapters in someone else's story now, but he knew that wasn't entirely true. The past remained part of him, just as Emma's memories of her parents would always be part of her. The difference was that pain and loss no longer defined them. Instead, they'd become the foundation for something better, a family built not on blood or obligation, but on choice and love, and the mutual recognition that some gifts are worth any sacrifice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to serve justice in a world that always needed more good men and women willing to stand up for what was right. But tonight, watching Emma sketch by lamplight while the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, Cole Mercer was exactly where he belonged. He'd finally found his way home.